you used to ask me all the time, what's wrong with you? Or why you acting dry? And those two statements were so triggering for me because it was like, ain't nothing wrong with me. I ain't acting dry.
And I'd be like, you are. Right there.
But
you are.
But just from a practical perspective, if you just flip that and you say something more like, it seems like something is on your mind, or do you want to talk about it? And so she's been very good lately, as opposed to saying, not even lately, it's been for a while. I'm giving her credit.
Thank you.
Is that she doesn't ask me those two questions anymore. She'll say, you seem to be deep in thought, or is there something that you would like to talk about? How can I support you? And I still may not want to talk about it, but saying what's wrong with you, nothing's wrong with me, but just by saying it that way could cause, or did cause, a defensive response or defensive posture. But to just to slightly consider and to come from a place of concern to say, I know you're quiet, and it's not that I'm acting dry, I'm deep in thought. So welcome to another episode of the Winning Team Podcast. I am Eugene.
I am Latanya.
And we are the Winning Team. We're excited. This is part 2 of a series of a podcast that we started. We had some technical difficulties. I know some of you tried to watch it on Facebook. We don't know what happened. Not on Facebook, but on YouTube. I don't know what happened, but either way, we are back, and many of you have been commenting, have been coming up to us talking about this episode. This episode actually has been one of the fastest growing episodes, the most downloads on Buzzsprout. So obviously communication and how to fix communication is something that's very important. And so, we wanted to make sure that we spent some time getting out part 2 of this episode. So what we did is we actually did research in YouTube and TikTok and Google, just to ask the questions like, what are the people asking about communication and how we can help? And so what we did is we researched and found that the top 5 questions that were being asked, because these are real questions, people were having real struggles, and so we wanted to give some real strategies based on the questions that everyone was asking. Yeah. And so we gave you 2 questions in the previous episode. Question number 1 was, how can you stop misunderstanding each other? That was a good conversation. So go back and see episode before this one to see how we had a little brief conversation on that. It really wasn't brief, but it was a good conversation on that. And then question number 2 was, what should I say when my partner goes passive aggressive? So that was another good conversation. So go check it out. But today,
we're going to jump right in. So to continue this conversation, as you said, it's been such a great conversation. And I think what I've loved the most is that as we were looking at these questions, we got to ask these questions even to ourselves. Like, how do we handle it? So it's not just us talking about this or giving our opinion. Like, we had to really do some introspective and do some conversation with one another on how do we handle this? What does communication look like? And how do we continue to have communication evolve and be intentional about communication? I think we mentioned that before, that in order for you to get to a place of healthy conversation, you have to be intentional. You have to be honest, and you have to be intentional about it.
How would you define intentional?
So I think it's just making time for one another, and not necessarily that it has to be these, when we're saying, oh, it's time to communicate, let's have these deep, major conversations. But I think it starts with just having a conversation, spending time with one another, having FaceTime. So looking in each other's eyes, and not that you're doing all deep, but you're not now trying to have a conversation while also texting or while also on your phone. And so it's about letting the person know that you want to hear what they're saying, that you're listening to what they're saying, and that you really care about what's going on.
I'll add one thing, to being intentional, is because communication is a skill. And a lot of times people will think, that you can improve communication by osmosis or by thinking hard about it, and you can't. Communication, just like any other skill that you have to work at it.
Yeah.
And so many people will say to us, and we're actually working on cutting down the time of some of our episodes, where some people say, man, I know I saw that clip, it was a good clip, but I haven't had time to go in to watch the whole thing, but I know I need it. And so my thought is that if you need something, then you should stop what you're doing to make the time.
Yeah.
Being intentional is about making the time. So whether, we turn on, and sometimes it's about changing your habits, because we listen to music while we're driving in our cars, but maybe you don't listen to music. Maybe you turn on the podcast as you're driving to and from work. And if the podcast is, let's say, 30 minutes or an hour, by the time you get to and from work 2 or 3 days, you've listened to the entire podcast. So intentionality is working on things that will improve your communication, and it's not working on things that will improve your spouse. Sometimes you have to become a better listener, because it's not what they're saying or how they're saying it, it's how you're interpreting and internalizing it. So I appreciate what you're saying about being intentional, because that's important.
All right, so let's jump into the question. What would be question number 3?
Question number 3.
Right. How do we bring up difficult topics without fighting?
How do we bring up difficult topics without fighting?
Yeah, I think this one for us. So we are not what would probably be coined fighters. We've shared this. Eugene is not gonna argue. I said I am a recovering arguer. I probably have an argue in my spirit. But, I'm learning to not. I called her the pop-off queen. And she's repressed, She's reformed. I'm not going to say repressed. She's reformed. She's reformed. And so, but I think in previous years, when things got difficult, we got silent. As opposed to, and I think some of that was, me saying, well, I know he's not going to want to talk about it, or he's not going to argue about it, or I don't know what's going to happen if we have this hard conversation. Will he get angry? Will you be mad? And so some of it, I think I was projecting on you. And so as opposed to handling it or opening our mouths and using our words, we just went silent and just prayed that it would go away, or either did some passive aggressive behavior, some passive behavior even, to say, okay, I'm no longer mad anymore, and now we made up, and so it's all better now. But we never really talked about whatever the issue was.
I agree. And I think when you ask the question, how do we bring up difficult topics without fighting, I think you have to ask the question is, how do you define difficult? Because sometimes, like, what you deem as a difficult conversation, I may not deem as a difficult conversation, and then vice versa. And we're not ones where we walk around on eggshells, because the reality is that I don't know if there were previous and past triggers that you had in the beginning of the relationship. I may just be saying, I could just be saying something that I think is just standard day to day. And when I do that, it could trigger you, which makes the conversation difficult. And so I think that before you get into that, I think and especially if you're not married yet and premarital, we did what I appreciated about us in our early days, even before we got married. We asked a lot of what if questions. Yeah. What about this? What if this happened? What if this? And it was all hypothetical. So because they were hypothetical questions and hypothetical situations, we were able to have some pretty candid conversations about someone else. And I think we mentioned this in the past, like even going to the movies, or we would, even recently watching the Black Love series, and listening to other couples as they go through, relational concerns or issues or happy moments. It gives us an opportunity to talk about that, because I think what happens in a relationship is that we had a tendency in the beginning to just accommodate one another, and we tolerated and or overlooked, and then even denied that some things were actually difficult. So if you don't define it, then what that could lead to, though, is eventually, if you keep on overlooking it, you can eventually blow up. And I thank God that we've never really had any blow up moments, but I think that we have had moments where it was like, okay, she's frustrated about this. What is it that's making her frustrated about it? Yeah. And then the same thing for me is like, wait, I'm frustrated. So, let's figure it out. And it's something as simple as chores around the house, setting proper expectations about who's supposed to do what. In the beginning, you may overlook and accommodate and may do all of the things because you think it's, cute, and that's just a part of your role. But as seasons change and you get a new job and you were in college, I was tired of you cooking the same thing, over and over
again.
Voila.
That was what it was.
And so
Chicken
eventually
voila.
I had to say, don't cook that no more. Or we just gonna figure it out, go out to eat. So again, and then if you even get from the point of accommodating, then it becomes something it could even be a little more, I don't want to say sinister, but manipulation can come into it because you're just trying to eliminate it all together and not trying to deal with it. And, when you're trying to do that could make it difficult. But the fundamental question that I think everybody has to ask before it's an issue is define what difficult is for you. And if you find yourself being triggered, and again, I know I've said this before, but there's many times she may say something or do something, and I pause, I reflect on me first. I will ask myself, why did that make me mad? And I know some of y'all say, oh, that sounds lame, that sounds this. But you keep getting in these cycles of fighting with your spouse, because it says, how do you bring up difficult topics without fighting? Well, if you want to do it without fighting, then sometimes you have to work on your emotional intelligence and figure out, why did something trigger you? Why did it make you mad to begin with? Because otherwise you'll do what she said, project, or you will be angry and you'll sin. You're supposed to be angry and sin not. So that's what I would say, is define what difficult is. But some more practical ways you can do it.
Yeah. So one other thing I want to say before we move on to the practical ways is, I don't understand why it has to be a fight. Like, difficult conversations don't have to lead to a fight. So when I saw that question, I was like, why is it a fight? Why isn't it just like, yes, this is a hard conversation. Like, how do you acknowledge that this is going to be a hard conversation, but I'm not having this conversation from a place of wanting to hurt you. I'm having this conversation because it's necessary for our marriage, for the relationship. And we're talking about this in context of relationships, but really this is communication, and so you gotta ask yourself, why does it have to be a fight? What's being said? Why does it lead to a fight?
You actually make a good point, because again, we are the winning team. We are on a team. We are partnership. We are in a partnership. And so, especially from the context of marriage, if you saw in any other context, whether you're at work, if you're fighting with someone at work, you know that it's not right. If you're on a sports team and you're fighting with your teammate, you know that it's not right. So the ultimate, penultimate team is a marriage. And so it should never get to the point of fighting. And if it does, you know that should be viewed as dysfunction. Somebody's trying to get their way. And you have to really ask yourself, how can we resolve the conflict so that we can work together as teammates so that we can do what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's give you some practical answers on how to do this. So choose the right time, right place, and tone. I would often share sometimes when we would have some difficult conversations, usually somewhere around money. Eugene would want to have a conversation as I'm walking out the door. Like, I'm getting the kid and myself out the door. And he'll say, oh, by the way, don't swipe the card. Don't do this. Don't do that. Hey, bro, why? Now I can't have this conversation as I'm walking out the door. And I had to say, can we have this conversation at a different time? It wasn't always, the tone, but it was always like, this is a hard conversation. that now I'm frustrated because we're having this as I'm walking out the door without any explanation. So, so choosing the right time, choosing the right place. You might have to leave if you can't have that conversation in your home. You might have to find a neutral ground, especially if tensions potentially could get high. You may have to find a place where you all know that you're going to have a reasonable conversation. Emotions will be controlled, and you don't have to. You won't get angry, I would say. And then the tone. Again, as a recovering pop-off queen, how you say something is either going to fall on deaf ears or I'm going to receive it in my heart. And so you have to really be careful of how you say this. And ladies, I know sometimes that's us, because by the time we done said something, our whole body is now moving and shaking, and so now you didn't hear anything, because now your emotions are aggressive, and that aggressive maybe not the best word, but now assertive. Your tone has changed, because the minute we get to moving our hands, our voice escalates. We now had a full body experience, and so now what's going to happen is that the person you're talking to, your spouse, is now going to react to all of those, or potentially react to all of those things, which now makes this difficult conversation now a fight.
And you have to know your spouse. So what I appreciate about LaTanya is that it's never been a time when you think about the right time and place. Like, if it's a difficult or a hard conversation, she's not going to bring that up in front of people or around people, or say something that will make me feel disrespected. Because if I feel disrespected, it may cause me to lash out. And I'm saying, just from a man's perspective, is that, we want to feel valued and respected. And I know that women want to feel loved, and there's many that want to feel respected as well. So both of us have to be careful about what you say, even when it's joking. Like, sometimes I am a jokester, and so sometimes I have a sense of humor. Some of y'all probably haven't seen it, but I realized a few times that I made jokes at her expense in the middle of the crowd, and then everybody didn't receive it the same way that she knew I was joking, but everybody else may not have received it that way. So now it can create tension in the air. And so I know we're good, but at the same time, it's like, I still, even though she knows I'm good, I don't want to make someone else look at her differently or me differently because I made a joke that may seem insensitive to somebody else, when it could be an inside joke for us. So I think you have to also be careful with who you're in front of, because some people may be okay with you joking, and because it may be some people and friends that you have an intimate relationship with, but other times around their parents or around their boss or around other people, sometimes you just have to know that some things that was perfectly fine around our friends is not okay in a work environment. So I think that, again, how do you bring up hard topics without it turning into a fight? It really depends on the situation, but it's good to have those conversations prior to, and understand that context and environment absolutely does matter. And it was one other thing that you were talking about in regards to feelings and the pop-off queen. And it was, something as simple as, and I'm so glad that we kind of changed this, because you used to ask me all the time, what's wrong with you? Or why you acting dry? And those two statements were so triggering for me, because it was like, ain't nothing wrong with me. I ain't acting dry.
And I'd be like, you are. Right there. But
just from a practical perspective, if you just flip that, and you say something more like, it seems like something is on your mind, or do you want to talk about it? And so she's been very good lately, as opposed to saying, not even lately, it's been for a while. I'm giving her credit.
Thank you.
Is that she doesn't ask me those two questions anymore. She'll say, you seem to be deep in thought. Or is there something that you would like to talk about? How can I support you? And I still may not want to talk about it, but saying what's wrong with you, nothing's wrong with me, but just by saying it that way could cause or did cause a defensive response or defensive posture. But to just to slightly consider and to come from a place of concern to say, I know you're quiet, and it's not that I'm acting dry, I'm deep in thought. So it's like, hey, is there something that I can support you with? Is there something that you would like to talk about? And then all of a sudden, I may say no, or then I say, well, actually, or, hey, what are you thinking about? And then it's like, what's on your mind? And so now all of a sudden, it opens the door for conversation and opens the door for me to share, as opposed to, because I feel supported. I feel like it's creating a safe space where I may be able to share. And then please, guys, please, that if you do open the door, don't be dismissive of whatever it is, because it's obviously something that they are dealing with, no matter how much you may think it's not a big deal. And that's what I had to work on, because I was a fixer. So if she's saying something that I thought like, oh, no, that ain't nothing, you could just do this. Well, it was something to her. So it's something that she was working through, but I would minimize it by saying, and I didn't think I was minimizing it, but my actions or my words would be, oh, just do this. And it felt dismissive. And if it was something that was deep to her, then now I just dismissed it. And now she feels some kind of way about it.
I want to add one more thing about time and place as well. So ladies, it's football season.
Sports period.
But in this house, it's football season, and
basketball starting.
It is. You have a little more flexibility in basketball.
It's football season.
As he's repping the Lions there. So football season. So, I feel like sometimes this time of year can be triggering, can spark some, sports is more important than me. And so there's some balance there. There's some balance that you have to choose. And so, if that's his time, his place, that for 25,000 hours, what feels like 25,000 hours, at least 4 hours out the day, they're going to be right there in front of the TV. That might not be the good time. That's probably not the time to decide that you want to have this very deep conversation and expect to have his undivided attention. And so I've learned that, like, okay, nope, if I need to bring this up, I may not even bring it up on Sunday. I might come back on Monday, before Monday night football, just saying, in order to be able to have the conversation that I feel like that's needed. So that time, that place, is really important.
It is. But fellas, I've also learned something that's very important that I want you to learn. It's called the pause and the record button.
That's what it is.
So I have learned to record games and to pause games, and I might spend the whole day at Ross and Marshall's and all of the things. And then when I get back, I can just watch without interruption and even without commercials.
So you tell me I'm happy. Secret.
That's the secret. That is the secret. Mm. The secret is I can give her my undivided attention while staying away. I even go into the apps and make sure, because there's a setting inside of all of the sports apps that will hide the scores of your favorite team, so you can enjoy time with your beautiful wife and not worry about the game. And then when you get home, she's like full, and now you can sit in front of the game and watch it all. Amen? Mm-hmm. But a gentle answer turns away wrath. That's what the Bible says. Mm-hmm. And so you got to understand and learn how to bring up something, because the way that you bring it up can either build a bridge or it can build a battlefield. And a lot of times we keep building battlefields and wondering why it's a fight, but it really should be an invitation to a conversation so that you all can get to know one another a little bit more.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. We want to go to question number 4?
All right. So, question number 4. What questions can deepen your relationship?
That's important.
It is.
And so, and here's the thing, y'all. I know some of y'all may think this sounds corny. But intentional check-ins are important. And so, we do date nights all the time. And so I know I've shared this secret on other podcasts, but I'm intentional about planning conversations. So if I have to, research questions and really dig deep and think about some of the things, because if you don't think about and become intentional about talking about what you want to talk about or researching what you want to talk about, you end up talking about the same things. You end up talking about the kids when you're there to really connect and talk about yourselves. So exactly. Work or kids. And so there are times where we may get out the one last thing while we're driving, and then we like, all right, no more questions about work. The kid always comes up, the kids always come up, but it comes up in a different way, not necessarily thinking about the logistics of the day, but it could be thinking about what is and what ifs and how do we dream and move forward, or how do we handle a situation. But some of the questions that you all can think about is, how can I support you better? And that's a question that I ask her often.
You do that
and
well.
It used to frustrate me to death, though, because she wouldn't have an answer, because she would always say, oh, you do a good job.
Yeah. And because I believe that you are intentional about my needs. I think you are intentional. You're tuned in to me. And so I don't ever feel like you're not, or the times that you are, I'm like, hey, can you put your phone down, or can you? So I don't feel like there is anything else that you can do. I'm sure there's always things, but I appreciate that conversation, or you asking that question on a regular basis, because there are times like, oh, and let me think about it, or nope, I feel good right now. I don't feel like there's anything else. So I'm not feel like I'm missing something, because I feel like that you are intentional on a regular basis.
But there's a flip side to that. And I had to really think about that, because, again, I said it used to frustrate me. But here's the compliment that she gave me unintentionally. She said, who you are serves me well. But that also means that in a relationship, you have to ask yourself, is being who you are serving your spouse well? And if it's not, then you have to be intentional about how you serve your spouse. Now, it's not a bad thing if it's not, because I believe that, sometimes we forget that men and women are different. We're made different, and we are different. God made us differently. So therefore, you must be intentional. If you answer no to the question that is who you are naturally, does it serve your wife? And if in your mind you like, I don't want to change who I am, I'm not saying you have to change who you are, but I am saying that you are called to serve each other. You are called to submit to one to another. But if naturally who you are is not doing that, then now you have to be intentional to figure out, how do you do that? So is being who you are, does that naturally serve your spouse? And if it doesn't, then you have to think about and ask the question even, what makes you feel appreciated? Now, when she tells you, or when he tells you, because I just told her, like, our entire 23 years of marriage, physical touch is my love language. But what I'm finding is in this last several months or this last year, words of affirmation has become more important to me. So I explained that to her the other day. I said, you know what? I think words of affirmation is becoming more important to me than I previously took credit for, but that was also because of where I was, because I would reject words of affirmation or deflect, I would say, words of affirmation. But now I'm learning how to receive that. And so now that's what I expect. But I shared that with her, because if I didn't share those expectations, then I couldn't hold her accountable to doing it or not doing it. So what questions can really deepen your relationship, before you go on date nights? Now, of course, it's not treated like an interview, but you really should start thinking about, what do I expect? What is God calling us to do? How are we supposed to function and do that together? Are we working well as a team? Do you know what your love languages are? Is there anything that you haven't talked about that's really on your heart, that you constantly think about every single day, but you're afraid to bring it up? Because those are the things that you should be figuring out a way to bring those up. And understand that everybody is is not the same. They don't process the same. Yeah. So sometimes when you're thinking about the time and the place, sometimes you may have to ask the question before you get to date night, or say, hey, here's my questions. You think about that, I'll think about it, and then we'll talk about it once we get to date night. Because, sometimes, popping those deep questions up on a person at the spur of the moment, they may not give you the answer that you're looking for, and now you'll be disappointed as well.
Especially if that's not something that you do on a regular basis in your relationship. If you have a lot of surface conversation, when it now comes time to have a deeper conversation, then it can feel like, well, why are you asking this question? Why are you being dramatic? And so now it leads back to our top question around, it now becomes a fight, And so if you see this as, I think you make a good point around, this is where you need to know your spouse. If you need to kind of prep for some of that, and be able to have some of that conversation beforehand, or share that information beforehand, but also now receive it. Like, well, what's the place that you're coming from? Why? And see it as, I want to build our relationship. This is not to hurt us. It's now to help us, to grow us, as opposed to now seeing this as something that you just trying to be dramatic, or why you asking all these hard questions? We just need to go eat, No, let's have some real conversation. Let's change up what we're talking about, so that we can now even do a check-in around, are we growing? Are we, much like what you just said, that your love language has changed. If we hadn't had that conversation, that's not something that I would have necessarily known. So it's okay to have a deeper conversation, because I think that's also where you can continue to grow and really just do a check-in to see where your spouse is.
Yeah, and it's a level of vulnerability, and people desire that. And so asking the deeper questions, going beyond the clichéic, how was your day? And the logistics, and only talking about the logistics of the day, and only talking about head things, as opposed to really starting to get vulnerable to say how you feel about it. If you don't ever get vulnerable, then a person, one or the other, the male, the man or the woman, will feel like it's a surface conversation, and they won't feel fulfilled. They won't feel loved, because they're not getting the vulnerability. Now, if you want, I'll share the questions, the date night questions that I came up with. I don't mind sharing them. If you would like the date night questions, just put date night questions in the comments, and I'll DM them to you later. So just put date night questions in the comments, and I'll send you all the questions that we have. So, Hebrews 3:13 says that we're supposed to encourage each other daily. So we should be using our words to build one another up. So we should constantly be trying to think about questions that can deepen our relationship.
All right, so let's go to our next question. So let me just say this, that these questions, have really been a game changer for us. And again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're not just having these conversations or bringing them up. They have been pretty instrumental in even guiding how we talk about and how we guide even our conversations, and even going into the weeks, even with one another. So we out here doing the work too, y'all. We doing the work.
That's a good point, because it's not just about talking about it. Like we're sharing what we actually do.
Yeah.
And when we say, oh, we don't fight, and some people be like, oh, y'all cheesy, y'all ain't never really been through. Yeah, we've been through a lot. It's just because we're talking to you about year 23.
Yeah.
But we ain't talking to you about what happened year 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, let's go back before that. Negative 2 years or whatever the case. Yeah. So before we got married, but I'm saying that, we have grown to this point. And so now we're just trying to share all of our testimonies. And the reason why we don't also tell you exactly what we did and exactly how, because what worked for us may not work for you. So we're telling you principles and giving you some things to think about, so that you can then take your circumstances and take all of your circumstances and apply what we're saying to that. So
let me add one more Bible verse that I think is just key to this conversation too, is just Philippians 2:4. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. So again, it's back to what we were talking about earlier around you being intentional about one another and checking in with one another. And I remember in marriage counseling that Pastor Jennings, shout out to Pastor Jennings, where he said, if I am concerned about you and you are concerned about me, all of our needs should always be met. And so I think that's just really in line with getting out of your own way. It's not, you can't only be all about you in a marriage. It won't work. You'll stay in this space of communication will always be an issue if it's always only about you. And so I think this was just a good reminder of, what the words say, and reminding that life principles to apply that to yourself.
And just thinking about that, again, these are questions that can allow you to go deeper in your relationship. So if you're not looking to your own interests, you can ask a question, just how can I love you better this week? And again, it's a day by day, week by week walk that you're doing. And if you're not having these conversations and you think about it from a love tank, if I'm not filling up her love tank and she's not filling up my love tank, then it never overflows, not only to one another, but to even everybody else that you're encountering. And so if you don't want to wait until you've drifted so far apart that it'll take so much for you all to reconnect. So that's the reason why we make sure that we're doing some type of date night, some type of connection, and we don't wait until the weekend. A date night can be a Tuesday. We go to concerts on Wednesdays or Thursdays, whatever it is. Like, you just find the time and make the time, not find the time. You make the time in order to stay connected.
All right, last question.
Yes.
So what are 2 questions that immediately improve your communication? So we kind of talked about that one a little bit earlier, but you want to give the practical answers around that?
So, when you're thinking about improving communication, it's really about, again, not being selfish. It's really thinking about, where the other person is and asking a question that's not laced in how it can serve you. So one of the questions is, how can I help? Like, it's such a simple question, but when she's coming home and she's talking about whatever it is, and sometimes, again, she said that sometimes I'm in my head, but sometimes I can tell when she may be in hers. And so I can just say something like, hey, I noticed that, you've been quiet today. Do you want to talk about it? Because what that does is it makes her feel seen, it makes her feel valued, and and that opens the door and lowers the guard, as opposed to saying something like, what's wrong with you? That's putting up the defensive. I ain't talked to you all day, and now you coming in here and you ain't even said nothing to me. It's like, immediately, I don't want to talk to you no more. So I don't want to talk to you because you've given no regard to how I may be feeling. And so, how can I help can be a question that you ask on the flip side, but tell me about your day. And then when you say, tell me about your day, you genuinely sit there and listen to them tell you. And they may run through every single detail. Yeah, first I got out of the car and I had a lot of bags in my hand. And so I had to put all these bags down and I dropped stuff, because that's how women process. And so they're sometimes, And so then, that's exactly how you sound. But again, I'm listening to her because I'm just engaged in, especially if it was a good day, it's like, ooh, let me tell you about my day. And so women can get on the phone and just connect and talk back and forth that way. And I'm not generalizing, saying all women are like that. But again, as men, we're naturally fixers. So it's like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. Let me just think about this. And you just start going through the day thinking about it. It's like they appreciate thinking through, like, what would I cook? Or what would I go eat? Or what could we do? And it's like, and then you have conversation about it. But for us, it's just like, look, let's just do this, and I'm done. But sometimes, fellas, you just have to sit there and enjoy spending the time and being engaged. And then if it is something that you feel like, oh, I can fix that just like that. Instead of fixing it, you could just say, how can I help? Most of the time, they're going to say, no, I'm good. They just needed to express it because they speak through emotions. And so they just need to express it. And now they feel better. And then they know exactly what they need to do. Because most of the time, if I say, how can I help? She'll come right back and tell me what she's going to do or what she has already done. But she needed to get it out because there's no one else. You've created, and if you created a safe space for her to share the emotions. So just allow her to be able to do that.
Yeah, you do a really good job with that. So I commend you on that, husband.
Amen.
Good job.
And here's the other reason why is that a lot of times, Galatians 6:2 says that we're supposed to carry one another's burdens. And if we're supposed to carry the burdens of the other people, then what about the people that are within our household, man? We're supposed to be priests, providers, and protectors, but we're not just providers of the financial things. We're providers of love, peace, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control as well. So those are also seeds that we should be planting in the people within our household.
I just recently saw I think it was an IG post of a husband and wife, and he was sharing that the wife it was some stressful conversations, some stressful things going on. He kind of was showing the wife walking back and forth, and he just stopped and hugged her and said, how can I help? And then drew her in closer and then just told her to breathe and count it down for her. And just how that settled her down. And so it was something about watching that I feel like Ephesians 4:32 really honed in on this for me, that be kind and compassionate to one another. He saw what was going on. He stopped and even had her just stop and take a moment and breathe. And so I think when you're able to do that, or you're asking that question around, can I help? Or I noticed, again, you've made me feel seen. You want to hear what's going on. And again, it goes back to what I was talking about around that intentionality around connecting and caring about one another.
So just wrapping up, communication is not just about what you say. It's really about how you show up in the conversation. And we've talked about, the 5 ways or ways to fix in communication. In the previous episode, we talked about why is communication so hard. So 2 episodes, I think, ago, you have to go check that out. But you have to ask and figure out, how do you show up in the conversation? And so if both of you are being intentional and trying to figure out, how do I show up well, and how do I show up in a way that does not cause a fight, but it actually builds the bridge to the next moment for us to connect, you will find that you're actually building an environment where peace abounds as opposed to fighting. So please just try to make sure that regardless of what they have done, you have the responsibility, because you can only control you. And so I know we only touched the surface, but again, if you all have some additional topics and or other questions in regards to communications or anything that we've kind of mentioned and brushed over or talked about today, and you feel like we brushed over it and want us to go deeper, put it in the comments and we'll be sure to respond.
Yeah. And it's our hope that we are dropping seeds. This is building unity with one another and just planting some humility, because a lot of communication is, as you mentioned earlier, about vulnerability. It's about humility. It's about bringing your whole self to the table. And so these questions, we hope, sparked some conversation. We hope had you thinking about some things, and even having different conversations with your spouse. And again, that these can even carry over into your workspace, how you talk with your children, because you communicate every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day. It is something, it is a skill that you are constantly building every single day. So why not work on it well, and so that you can have some better and healthy communication.
Amen. So appreciate y'all. Please like, share, follow. Please share, send it to make sure you're talking to other couples, other people that you believe could benefit from this podcast. And we appreciate all of your support. And until next time,
we out.
Peace.